Okay, so in this video, I'm going to cover Redux Toolkit Query, the standard type, where I'm going to show how to set everything up, the store, the provider, everything, and then just load from an API all this data. And before I go any further, let me show you where the data is coming from. Data is coming from this guy right here, dummy JSON. And in here, they have nice little product information. You can use this to build entire e-commerce application. So this is pretty nice. And also, I'm using Tailwind CSS for styling. Now let's get back. And this one you're looking at is a standard setup. Like when I'm calling the RTK hook, the default one, it just pulls in the data, you take the data and you display on the screen. So not much control over how, or when we call that hook. So after this, I'm gonna go to this one where I have 3 different ways to use that query, but this time they're gonna be conditional. Upon on click, they will generate the data. Like for example, here, it's gonna pull in the data on click. And you probably saw the data, some data loaded before, but because it's using the cache. And in here, I'm using another API endpoint where I'm using, let's say, product ID 7. And according to that, I'm gonna get the product information. For example, product ID 7 is Samsung Galaxy Book. And if you look here, it's the exact same product. So this is basically another endpoint with the ID as a parameter. And in here, this is another endpoint that I'm about to show you, but this one will use one of these categories as parameter. For example, tops, and then hit, and boom, look, all the categories are tops. And the last but not least would be how to use the skip token. So basically, recently I was working on a product where I had to use, get the data according to, categories. But my first one was a category all, right? But in the backend endpoint, there was no such thing as all. So every time I was sending all to that API, I was getting an error message. The app was working, it wasn't crashing, but it was giving me an error message. So now I have this kind of setup where, here I am actually setting up all as the beginning point, and then manually, as soon as I hit this fetch data, I'm manually changing the category to skincare. And watch that, if I refresh, nothing will load because it has all. But then as soon as I hit this, I'm going to get that skincare data right here. It's a smidgen bit complicated, but as soon as we look at the code, you're going to find out. So let's start here, the basic setup. Okay, first thing I did was created a folder called service. By the way, just so you can have a small overview, like this is my Tailwind config. That's how I set up. And this is my package.json. You can see all this Tailwind stuff. And in here, the regular React stuff. Extra thing I added is like the Daisy UI, which is based on Tailwind. And these two guys are a must: React Redux and Redux Toolkit. And you can see the versions here. Now let's go to our page 1. Actually, before I even go there, I think I should start right here, services. And in here, I have this dummy trigger API. So from the React Toolkit, I'm getting create API and fetch base query, and creating a separate function with parameters. I'm giving only an URL here, but you can add like headers and other params, etc., etc. So that's what I have here. Well, I'm doing it this way because This function is necessary when things get complicated. You need API keys, headers, etc. So that's why I'm having it ready just in case I need it. Fortunately, this dummy JSON does not require any API key or anything. So I have the function ready. I'm using it and throwing only the URL to it. But when I need to send other things, I will have it handy. And then I add the base URL. And this structure you can always find in the documentation. There's nothing to talk about here. But first thing that I'm going to work on is this guy, get all products. So the URL I'm putting it through is products question limit 100. All 100 products I'm trying to collect. So once this query is set, I am sending with all the others this hook, use get all product query. Basically, it's just whatever your query is, get all products. You just add use first and then query in the end. That's how you form this hook, use get all products query, right? So now the query is set, and all of these should go with the dummy JSON API. And the next step is to build a store. And I have the store right here. Here I am bringing configure store from Redux.js toolkit, and the dummy JSON API that we just created is coming from dummy trigger API, this guy right here. And now the rest just boilerplate. It's just pretty much taking this and using a reduce path and dot reducer, and at the same time calling in a middleware and throwing that same dummy JSON API dot middleware. These are pretty much always boilerplate. So you can get this code in the documentation easily. So this is how the store is set up. And once this store is set up, then I go to the index.js. In here, I'm getting the provider from React Redux and the store that you just saw. And then I am wrapping the app with provider and passing store as a parameter. Now let's go see our page one. Let's check on the front end. In here, some usual stuff, some components for layouts and such, and the React loader spinner, bringing the audio type. And this is the most important part. We are getting this use get all products query from services and dummy trigger API. Let's once again take a look. This is the regular query. This guy right here, we're sending to JSON, dummy JSON.api, and from this file. So that's what we're calling in, use get all products query. And this query gives us data, is fetching, is success, etc., etc. But all we need is the data and the is fetching. In here, I just renamed data to all product data, and I'm console logging it right here. And I'm using is fetching here with a loading spinner. The audio is coming in, and then I'm taking in the all products data dot products and looping through and showing the product ID and product title. Very simple right here. So if I reload, this is the spinner and data is loaded. And as you can see, whatever we're getting, dot products has 100 products right here. All right, so that's how you set up the standard version of RTK Query. Now let's look into a little bit more advanced one where we are loading the data conditionally, right? So that would be this page right here, home. In here, we are using the use lazy get all products query. So this is pretty much exactly the same thing. Only thing is right after use, you add lazy, this word, just like that. But you have to make sure that you are actually exporting the same thing from here though. So as I have the regular query, use get all product query. I'm also sending the use lazy get all product query. And this is the one I am bringing here, use lazy get all product query. And initially I am just getting it pretty much exact same setup, but in this one though, all the stuff that regular query gives you, the data is fetching, they still stay there inside an object, but additionally inside an array we get the function that we're going to call. So that way what happens is what you saw previously in here, when you call it this way, right, it just executes this hook and gets the data on every page load, no control. But if you do it this way, call a lazy query gives you all that the regular query, but also a function that will actually execute. So now let's see how we are using this get data function. So let's go all the way down. In here, this is the first column. This is our first column here. Here we're getting this, using the is fetching all products, which is this guy right here. And I had to rename them because there are multiple of them, right? So I just renamed this so that there's no conflict. So in here is fetching all products. I'm using that to load up a loading spinner here. And then I'm actually using a button, get data, handle get data, and that function right here, handle get data, simply calling get data that we just received from our lazy query right here. See, this lazy query takes no parameters or anything, just gives us get data. This function given to us by RTK Query, we're using it in a on-click function. Thus, as soon as I click here, it goes out there and reloads the data. Let's try once again. And you saw the data getting loaded, first before even it actually makes the call, because you actually saw the cache data. That's the best part about Redux. It's going to cache the data, so it loads up very fast. Your front end will load up very, very fast. Right here, first iteration, you're seeing like the product data here. This is from the cache, and this is from the API. Now let's check out the next column. So I'm going to go ahead and make this one smaller. So this is our second column. Let's expand that. This guy right here. So to find out what this is doing, I'm going to have to go with the top one here. Use lazy get single product query, right? And where this is coming from, it's coming from our dummy trigger API. If we look here, we will find this guy. Use lazy get single product query. And this guy actually is right here. Simply get single product. And this is a query where we are actually calling on the API endpoint products / ID. This is going to be our parameter. We just pass the ID parameter through this guy, use lazy get single product query, and then we're going to go ahead and call him right here. And this part right here, where we actually utilize it, same as before. This time we're getting a get single data function, and everything else is the same. I just renamed them so that they don't conflict. And this time in this block, if you see, it actually has another button, get single data, and it's calling handle single data. And we have handle single data, but this time we are actually providing it with a parameter, post ID. And post ID here, I just created a use state, using use state, post ID, set post ID, and initially it's going to start from 1. So basically, even if I don't have anything, it's going to give me product number 1, iPhone 9, right? So then we have an input in this box, right? So on change, anytime somebody inserts a number in this input, we're setting the post ID e.target.value. So whatever number we put in, this post ID gets updated, and once somebody's clicked that handle, the on-click button, which launches handle single data, this one will call in the get single data with the post ID. Now let's see it in action. So pretty much this input box, if I put 8, all of a sudden the post ID that we declared here has a value of 8. And now when I click that black button, it calls this handle single data, and we pass this post ID through get single data to our trigger here. And this guy takes this ID and makes the API call with that ID and produces this result. 8 will call in product ID with 8. Boom. And to verify Microsoft Surface, we got the right product data. All right, so now this time we're going to focus on our column number 3, where we are going to pass a category and hit this button, and it's going to go to a different endpoint and get us category related data. So let's see in here. Okay, so now let's minimize this guy and open up this guy. That's our third column. And let's start from the top. In this case, we are bringing in use lazy get product by category query, right? It's pretty much the exact same query. We just add lazy in front of it, right? And it is coming from dummy trigger API. And we have our get product by category. This is the guy, right? So this one becomes use lazy get product by category. Use lazy get product by category, right? So let's come here, use lazy get product by category, and we're calling him here. And this is getting the same things. I just renamed them, but it's getting a different function. It's getting get data by cat. By the way, this function names, you can use anything you like. I just used whatever makes sense, right? Get data by cat, category or cat. And this one, if we go to that real block, we have this button, and this button is calling handle data by cat, right? So we go to handle data by cat. All we do, grab this guy, get data by category, or get data by cat. And in here, we also have another state, post cat or post category. So in here, this guy, and it has a set post category. Initially, it starts with an empty text. And if we look closely, we'll find another input box here. And here, we throw in an on change event. Anybody putting anything there will change that state by using set post cat and e.target.value. Whatever is inserted here, and that becomes the state of this guy right here, post cat, and this post cat is going in through this function as a param. Basically, it's going to be a category name, and this function will be called from this guy right here through this lazy query, use lazy get product by category query, which is this guy, get product by category and cat name, and use that. It's a brand new endpoint, product/category with the category name. And that will generate, let's say if I put skincare, and then hit enter or press this button. It's going to get me all that category info. As you can see, all the categories are skincare, and if I put tops in there, and it gets me all the category tops. So that being said, let's move to our next step, where we call RTK query using skip token. Okay, so as I've explained before, I have a situation here where I am trying to get products by category name, but my first one shows up as all, let's say a drop down or something, right? But in this case, there is no all endpoint, right? There's no such thing as a category name all in my API. So every time, if I just refresh and if data gets loaded, as you saw here, just to refresh with all the data, it will hit anyway, right? It's going to go get the data, because this time I'm going to be using the regular query, not a lazy query, right? So regular query will always be enforced and get the data, but in this case, as you can see, it is not being loaded only when I set up this button and setting up the category name skincare and hitting this, only then it's being invoked conditionally because I use skip token. So let's go to the code. All right. So as you can see here, here I'm loading up the regular query, not a lazy query, right? Use get product by category, and using it by sending a category parameter, and inside an object I'm giving it a skip and a value is not okay. It has a state right here, and we also have a cat as a state right here, and I'm having a use effect where I'm actually setting the product data. We also have a product state here. Inside a use effect, we are setting up product data, and then eventually we are looping through that product and making the data show up. So if it was like the one before, right, page 1, where we are using the regular query, which loads up when the page is refreshed, in this case, it is not happening because of this not okay skip token, which is true. So whatever is skip true, it will just skip calling the data altogether. For that reason, if I just refresh, no matter how many times I refresh, the skip will always stay true and no calls will be made. As you can see here, let's refresh. There is no fetch request, nothing, right? The API is left alone completely. But when this button is pressed, and this button is calling an on-click function called handle cat data, in here what we are doing is we are changing the state of is not okay, which used to be true, right? Is not okay. We're turning that false, and we are setting a category data to skincare so that we actually get certain data from the database. So we're changing this cat value to skincare, which used to be all, right? And when all was there, we had skip token is not okay. Because of that, it wasn't making any calls to the database or to the API. But now, once we click this button here, this function will be called, and this will set that token to false. And once this is false, this call will be made and data will be collected. Thus, the product data would show up and we can loop through like this. We hit fetch data. Boom, look at that. Fetch call has been made. Preview, and all the data. Response is the data, and everything is coming from the API just because now the skip token has been set to false. Okay, so before I finish this one, I just wanted to show one of my professional level projects where I actually had to use multiple services like this, and how I actually, prepare them and set them up at the store. I just wanted to show, for example, in here. So this data is being collected from Rapid API, where I had to use the Rapid API, the API key and its own URL, which is pretty much packaged in one header. So I had to create this object, and then remember that make API call, the ones I showed you just a few seconds ago had only the URL. So in here, I just had to add this one extra parameter, which is headers, and this object went in as the value of header, and the rest is pretty simple. It's basic, the base URL and all the other, and in this case I'm using just the standard queries, no lazy queries. So it has like multiple endpoints, and some endpoints requiring multiple parameters and such. And in the end, I just exported all of them here. And since I showed you that we have multiple services, so this time my store architecture is going to be a little bit different. So let's go to the store. In here, this is what it's looking like. So if you have multiple sources, multiple API setups, you just call them in like that, and then under a reducer, you just call them as an object by adding multiple of them. And also in the middleware section, you just use the same concat, but this time use an array instead of one single one, and use them back to back. And that's, my friend, is a professional level setup. And that concludes my video on RTK query setup and examples. Thanks for watching.